Well, hello and welcome to the LLG podcast. We're fresh out of the governance conference, that's the good news. So today we're going to be having a bit of a deep dive into what was covered in some of those sessions. But before we get into the meat of our discussion, I'm Deborah Evans, Chief Executive of LLG, and joining me today we have
Helen McGrath, Executive Director of Policy and Governance.
And lovely to be with you all today. So governance conference this year was really on topic, looking in some detail at why local authorities fail, public interest reports, non-statutory inquiries, and a lot of the things that underpin that. So what is the role of a monitoring officer? How does the improvement and assurance framework work? As well as some real forward-looking sessions about things such as artificial intelligence. So where to start? Well, one of the sessions I found particularly interesting was the plenary at the start of the day led by Trowers and Hamlins, but involving Teresa Grant and Daniel Fenwick, who had both been at Liverpool Council during the intervention. And obviously Teresa's also got experience at Northamptonshire as well. And that was amazing, just able to understand the gritty reality of actually working in an intervention, of working with commissioners, of looking to keep staff motivated in what can be quite a demoralising situation. And what came across really strongly there was the power of good leadership. And that's not just necessarily doing the right thing, it's about having the ability to communicate positively the road that's being travelled, to rebuild the culture and almost like reinstill some hope in the organisation. And clearly interventions are very, very challenging, but it does create an opportunity to actually make changes in a local authority and turn them around and take them to a better place, in effect with backing, so people are behind you on wanting to do that. And so the outcome of an intervention, if you're willing to stick with it and work with it, can actually be very satisfying. So that was really, really good to hear. And they talked a lot about the importance of culture in really bedding down the way that a local authority is able to work in best practice from a governance perspective. And culture is something that's really difficult to measure. It's not like a budget or how big are your reserves. It's something much more nebulous, but people know what good culture looks like and they know what bad culture feels like. And just because it's hard to measure and it's complex doesn't mean we should shy away at looking at what the red flags are in a poor culture and getting a feel for what a good inclusive culture looks like. Now this ties in quite nicely then with what we heard in the second plenary from Grant Thornton about some of the research they've been doing as to why local authorities fail. So Helen, over to you for some more on this.
Yes, this is the report, which is currently in draft form, but it's due to be published at the end of November, on preventing failure in local government. It's been written by Grant Thornton, and LLG CIPFA, Solis and ALATS at the beginning have been involved in the research to formulate this report. Now, it talks very much about the themes that relate to examples of government intervention, auditors' use of their statutory powers, and the issuing of Section 114 or Section 5 notices. And it looks at the causal factors and structures, both internally and externally, in relation to some of the challenges that local authorities are facing. So we know from previous discussions that internal factors such as, the prevalent use of council-owned companies, Section 151 officer or the MO not being on the senior management team, over reliance on interim statutory officers, and the more complex nature of combined authorities can be challenging when it comes to governance. And then we have the sort of weaker risk management, members not fulfilling responsibilities, weak treasury management, and lack of commercial expertise that flow from that. But I mean, I really wanted to concentrate on the culture that can be seen in these types of local authority interventions and public interest reports. And as you rightly say, Deborah, it's very difficult to measure cultural failings in the same way as service deliverable failings, for example. But really, there are a few words within the report which really, for me, set out what a toxic culture looks like, and that's things like poor relationships, leadership intolerant of challenge, willful ignorance, misplaced optimism, bullying, marginalising dissenters, refusing to listen, and the use of closed meetings where the MO is not invited, for example. And I think this really fits into our campaigns for the future, things that we're working on now that we want to bring effective change into the sector on. And that's basically, we feel, sweeping legislative reform to the old local government acts, 72 and 89 in particular. We also feel really strongly that in order to raise the status of monitoring officers, they're going to need legal qualification in the same way that a Section 151 officer must be so financially accredited. Statutory protection for monitoring officers. We were promised this by the government following the recommendations of the Committee on Standard in Public Life's review. They haven't happened. And meaningful sanctions. You know, we know that the government has been, up until this date, really against sanctions, but the monitoring officers we speak to consistently feel that their hands are tied behind their back when it comes to enforcing ethical conduct. So it was a really interesting debate. We also heard from Andy Burns from CIPFA as well in relation to the pivotal role of the 151 officer. And really, we all just want to work together to bring about effective change and reinforce the Golden Triangle model, which I think is essential for good governance in local authorities.
What can we do? That is the question. And one of the breakout sessions with Phil McCourt from Bevan Britain then went on to look at work that LLG is doing in conjunction with CIPFA and Solace to develop a code of practice around good governance, a code that looks at standards as to what good governance looks like for those local authority statutory officers. So we're not talking about a general wider code of standards or code of practice. We're talking about a code solely for the Section 151 officer, the head of paid service, typically the CEO, and the monitoring officer. So how does this golden triangle work, and how should they work together? So this particular code is going to have a look at a number of things. It's working around 8 principles within the golden triangle that will make it work well, and I'm going to paraphrase them now, but it's about respecting each other's roles and responsibilities and understanding that there are 3 different roles here with 3 different sets of responsibilities. It's about the duty to ask, this duty of inquiry. This is not a role where you can just sit there quietly and wait for people to tell you what's going on. You have to find out. It's about being robust in working arrangements and making sure that the meetings that are supposed to happen, that you're in every meeting you need to be, that you sit at the top table, that your reporting lines are correct. But it's about making sure that the roles, particularly that of the monitoring officer in our case, get the status that they deserve. It's also about resourcing up and getting the tools to do the job. So this is about ensuring that you've got the right training that you need to do the job, that you've got sufficient finance to ensure that that and other things are the case. It's also about building resilience through appointing deputies to provide obviously cover if you're not able to be there, but also really to expand the number of people who are able to serve this function. It's also about acting wisely in the discharge of functions and using discretion. This is not the easiest area in which to work, because many of the situations you'll be faced with will be complex, and it may be things you haven't faced before. And you always have discretion, for example, when it comes to raising notices or issuing reports. And it's about thinking, do I need to use that discretion? It's about championing good decision making on what a good decision looks like. And it's also about the tricky issue of providing effective oversight where the council has external companies and entities. So this idea is all about taking those findings that we've seen coming out of Grant Thornton and various other pieces of research that we've been involved in, and building something positive that will then mean for existing monitoring officers and new monitoring officers, there's a piece of paper that you can pick up that will give you guidance and that you can show to other people within your local authority and say, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. So at the end of the day, I think that will be a real positive outcome, and there'll be more on that coming shortly. We're hoping to hold some roundtables and to distribute some drafts so that you can all tell us what you think. So on that subject then of use of discretion and whether or not to issue notices or reports, Helen.
Yes, and can I just apologise for my gravelly voice here? You can always tell when you've had a good conference when your voice is affected afterwards, so please bear with me. So yes, the session with Suki Binjal and Mark Greenborough was a great session from the point of view that it was very practical. Yes, it covered a bit of the law, it needed to, but when we're talking about statutory reports, whether to issue or not to issue, what we really need is the practical hands-on approach to what monitoring officers need to consider, because it creates enormous tensions. There's the fact that officers support the administration, but actually they serve the council, and there are whistleblowing considerations. Not to mention that statutory reports can be seen as the real nuclear option and affect a monitoring officer's career actually moving forwards, which is why we want the statutory protections for monitoring officers. But also the other thing to note is issuing a Section 5 report often precedes statutory intervention. So they took us through the law, but it was really interesting to hear about factors around the consultation element in relation to that must precede a Section 5 notice, about who should be consulted and how long it should take. And actually it was interesting to learn that consultation need not be for an exceptionally long period of time. It might be even 24, 48 hours, purely on the basis of what's happened needs immediate action. But it was an informative talk by both of them around the kind of issues that they faced through their own working life and when they've been given advice as well. I think the main thing that came out of it were the lessons learned, and actually lessons learned was a theme of the entire conference, which was great, because that's where you need to listen, because that's where you're going to get the most benefit from. And really in relation to issuing notices, this was around preparing your ground, taking advice, seeking allies from external audit and colleagues. When you're doing consultation, keep records, even the informal consultation, and just don't wait too long, but don't go too early. And is consultation that you've undertaken enough? Has the results been achieved? But above all, and the biggest message was, be brave and be resilient, because at the moment that's all the characteristics that MOs need to have most fundamentally. And actually, as we'll see later, that's something Peter Ware comments upon, about just how remarkable and how resilient MOs in this difficult time are being in their working life.
I think that's an excellent bit of advice. Be brave and be resilient. And I always think be independent is also something worth noting. And we saw that coming out in a number of sessions where people were saying that quite often when local authorities are failing or are in these very difficult circumstances, the people at the top do not recognise that they are failing. And it often takes somebody to actually look at things independently and think this is not right, and then to be brave enough to say something. So I think that's a really good observation. But we also took the opportunity to have a look forward at what might be coming in legal services over the next few years. So we spent some time having a look at the use of artificial intelligence in legal services, whether that be for legal research. In a matter of seconds, you can do a full trawl of legislation, case law, etc., using AI. But as many people know, accuracy is not guaranteed. So if you use ChatGPT, for example, it will deliver you a full roundup of everything it can find on that particular topic. but then at the bottom it will say quite clearly, ChatGPT makes mistakes, please check any confirmation information, content, advice, etc. for accuracy. But as well as research, we also looked at its ability to draft. And AI is capable of producing a starting first draft. It's not capable at the moment of producing a finished product, but why would you want it to be? Because that's the role of the lawyer, to bring in the empathy, the thought around impact, etc., that will mean that drafts have to be nuanced. And again, back to that accuracy point, we can't move away from that. It has to have that legal oversight for it to stand a chance. But it does give you a starter for 10, which may enable you to work more quickly and smartly. And obviously there is hope in the future that some of the accuracy issues may be solvable. AI also has a bad habit at the moment of hallucinating and inventing things that aren't there. And interestingly, the experts aren't entirely sure why it does that, but it does. So that there's some issues that they're trying to have a look at around that. And then some thought was given as to the role that AI may play in legal services in the future, because I know many of you out there will be wondering whether at some point legal roles could even be replaced because of AI. Now, our view in LLG is that AI is a tool, it's not a role replacement, and that you can't take away what a lawyer brings to any contract, any negotiation, etc. But we see it more as a tool. But there's some debate out there as to which way it would go. But on the plus side, it was a really engaging session with lots of questions being asked. And what it did do is demystify artificial intelligence. And people left feeling like they'd really understood the subject and they knew the sort of things that we could potentially be facing, using in local authorities, and how it might impact on life in the future. In many, many ways, this is going to be positive. It will decrease the administrative burden within law. It could help lower the costs of delivery and improve the speeds of delivery, which from a local authority perspective is absolute gold dust. So generally speaking, that was a really, really well received session. And then, Helen, I think you had a look at a very different side of things with the LGA, didn't you?
That's right, Deborah. I was really interested by the LGA's Improvement and Assurance Framework for Local Government session, because at present, there's nothing which sets out the elements in one place or demonstrates how they all fit together for both councils and the public to see in respect of the framework. So I know that the LGA have been involved in lots of discussions with the sector, and indeed I've been involved in some of those, but you've taken a real interest in this, haven't you, Deborah?
I have indeed, and the long and the short of it is we have a really complex system here of improvement and assurance with many, many different factors and facets. So, you know, you'll be aware of internal audit, for example. You'll be aware of things like the fact that people review their constitution and they review their delegated authorities. But there are so many different things, whether it be scrutiny committees. There's lots of opportunities to actually look at decision making within a local authority, but it's never been mapped. So one of the first steps the LGA took was to actually map all of the different parts of assurance that lead to the framework. And then moving forward, what we're going to be looking at is whether there's any gaps in assurance or whether there's any duplication and areas that perhaps could be simplified and slimmed down a little bit. Because obviously the aim is to get good assurance of everything, but you don't want a really complex structure that's very resource intensive. So first step is the mapping, and then the second step really is to have a look as to could we do this any better. I think in Rachel's introduction to the entire conference, she talked about spring cleaning. When you get everything out of your cupboards, then you have a look at it and you decide what you want to keep, what you want to recycle, what you want to put in the bin, etc. And it feels a little bit like that. We're certainly having a look and thinking, okay, where are the areas of this assurance framework that really deliver, what needs to be slightly different, etc. But as well as just getting that framework mapped, the improvement side of things is then about building in sector-wide improvement. So we will all have a local picture of assurance, and we may have some ideas around local improvements. But if all of this information could be captured, we could then look at sector-wide improvement. We could potentially look at like themed reports, and have a better driving force to really improve best practice. So this is a very positive piece of work. The aim is to make assurance work more efficient, more effective, but actually deliver sector-wide improvement. So really interested to see where this is going in stage 2, but the map is there. If you'd like to have a look at it, then it'll be there on the LGA site for everybody to see. So obviously it goes without saying that all of the work we're doing is connected. So if you're looking at an improvement and assurance framework, the role of the MO, the role of the Section 151 and the CEO are going to be absolutely central in all of that. But being, as we are lawyers in local government, we thought it would be a really good idea to do a deeper dive into the role of the monitoring officer. Helen.
Absolutely, Deborah. This is a piece of work that's been really quite exciting, and I would say the sort of first of its kind. Actually, it's the culmination of work between Brown Jacobson and LLG, and as ever, we're exceptionally grateful to Peter Ware from Brown Jacobson for enabling this piece of work, where the LGIU were instructed to undertake research on the changing role of the monitoring officer. And this is an incredibly detailed report. It looks at the role of a monitoring officer in the way that has never been done before. If you look at any information that's currently out there about what an MO does, it basically says very little at all. And this is the first time that everything, the whole role, is really examined in detail, from not just all the legal areas, but all the political areas, and how they spend their time essentially at times policing behaviour within their local authority. And we say, in the absence of meaningful sanctions and tensions with commercial objectives, as well as having a lack of seat at the top table, has really made the job of being an MO, broadly, at worst impossible, at best challenging. But we say that out of adversity comes opportunity, and because this is the first culmination of a concerted effort within the sector to really define the role of the monitoring officer and to analyse the barriers to effective delivery of the role, we say that this is the first steps of effective governance. And improving effective governance, and as I mentioned earlier, Peter Ware was saying that despite the incredible pressures that monitoring officers are under, they continue to show resilience and provide invaluable guidance and direction in the work that they do for their authorities. And he's absolutely right. So the report makes several recommendations. Interestingly, one of the ones that are not as strongly highlighted within the report, which is something that that LLG have been campaigning for, and something incidentally that the Law Society also supports, is the determinative need for monitoring officers to be legally qualified, because we say this will really help the status of a monitoring officer in their local authorities, and therefore be most likely to have the authority to be invited to the top table, to be seen in relation to all those really important decisions that local authorities make at the corporate leadership team level. And indeed, the report itself highlights that where a monitoring officer is not respected within a local authority, then failings are more likely to occur. So the report highlights that we criticise the lack of requirement for legal qualification of MO, but obviously we know that other organisations don't take that view. However, I do consider it to be one of the main central arguments, aside from sanctions and standards, that needs to change and needs to be enabled in law, because otherwise I think we are going to continuously find it difficult. And when I say we, what I mean is the monitoring officers working within England. But the report is exceptionally detailed. It's 28 pages. It's been done by people who are extremely intellectually capable, and yet it's been delivered in a really accessible way from the point of view of language. I think it's something we should all be really proud of. But I know you've got another concern that you might want to discuss, Deborah, in relation to one of the outcomes in the report, or lack of outcome in the report.
Yes, indeed, and there were questions asked from the audience at the time, with a couple of the comments in this report that seemed to jar a little with some of the findings from other reports. So obviously the Grant Thornton report is coming out based on its research with the need for a professional qualification for monitoring officers, and this is something that I think the LGA have also looked at from the point of view of their research as well. So that was really seen as a missed opportunity by some of the people in the audience, because this has been something that's been argued for years, and it's about status. It's about getting that position recognised across the local authority, and it's also about the skills that being a lawyer bring to that role, and about the fact that people are able to give legal opinion when they're in the middle of those difficult meetings, rather than having to leave and then consult for extra advice. So that's something that obviously LLG feels strongly about, because our members feel strongly about, who are by far the majority of monitoring officers. So that was the first point. And then there was also some feedback with respect to needing a professional organisation for monitoring officers as well. And you know, obviously at the moment LLG is fulfilling the needs of the monitoring officer, hence the reason we were doing the governance conference, the national lead groups, etc. But the question mark as to whether there is something that we perhaps need to badge as separate for monitoring officers, to actually sort of give it more professional weight, or do we need to look at becoming chartered in the way that some other organisations have? So that's something we're going to have a look into, just to make sure that monitoring officers can be seen as a body, as well as the wider lawyers in local government group. I mean, obviously SIPFA is very similar. It represents all finance professionals rather than just section 151, but that's something that came out in the report. So we'll have a bit of a look at that, I think. Another session we had that day was on non-statutory inquiries. Now this again was particularly interesting because we were in Sheffield, and we had the CEO, the monitoring officer from Sheffield Council talking to us, a very positive presentation, along with Henry Birmingham from Waitmans, with respect to non-statutory inquiries and the lessons learned really out of the Sheffield trees dispute, which was used to illustrate how again you can use a non-statutory inquiry very positively to make changes in a local authority. And that there was talk about the need to proceed with care when you call non-statutory inquiries, because they're very expensive, not just from a financial point of view, but from a time commitment and a resources perspective. But equally, when you start an inquiry, you don't know what the outcome is going to be. You don't know what will be unearthed as part of the inquiry. So, you have to be prepared for everything, really. And typically where there are non-statutory inquiries, it's usually because there's been something happening of controversy. So this was perfectly illustrated on the day, because we had a number of protesters from the local Sheffield community who came to sort of share their views on the issues around the Sheffield Trees inquiry. And obviously we have no problem with people's right to protest, and they did it in a very peaceful way. But it just goes to show those issues around engaging with the community when you're dealing with non-statutory inquiries. So that was absolutely fascinating. And I have to say, there were, from our perspective, there were sort of no bad sessions in this conference. And I don't mean that from a bragging perspective, but literally every session was fascinating and was full of really helpful, useful information from professionals who are right at the front of local authorities and who are in the midst of all of these things. So everybody was on a learning curve. Everybody had the opportunity to learn from the experience of others, which obviously means that you know, should any of them face these sort of things in the future, at least they'll be prepared, which is the main thing. And it was a fantastic opportunity really to network with others from the profession, have some of those safe space conversations, and really also look after your own well-being from the point of view of a problem halved is a problem shared, and you get to share and celebrate some of your successes as well. So it was a really good conference, and I'd like to thank everybody who came for joining us. If you didn't come, have a think about it next year. We also have, in effect, part 2 of our conference this Friday, which is the online day, with a number of excellent remote sessions for you to access and learn from. So that's it from me. It's goodbye from me, and I hope you'll join us again. Helen?
Yeah, thank you very much, and look forward to seeing everybody on Friday.